he wholly belongs to that contradiction-riddled Asia in which people use the subtlest forms of torture on you after extremely sweet diplomatic formalities.
In actuality, Ho and his comrades are not always that subtle in their brutal elimination of rivals, be they nationalists or even fellow communists, Trotskyites for instance. The names of those murdered by Ho's comrades in the early days of the August Revolution could be said to be a roster of some of the most brilliant minds of the time.
This order of September 5, 1945, was followed by many acts of persecution by the communists and in cooperation with the French. One of the most vicious things the communists did was to assassinate the young man who was the leader of the Wahao religion. Now, this didn't take place until 1947, but this young man, his name was Wen Fushou. He had a mystical religious experience in the Mekong Delta in the late 1930s, and he formed a kind of special Buddhist religion which was also a nationalist. It had a nationalist flavor because a good Vietnamese, according to Wen Fushou, must repay the debt of the ancestors in the mountains of the rivers of Vietnam. And in 1945-46, Wen Fushou had a following in South Vietnam of maybe 2 million people, it's been estimated. When the communists, when Ho Chi Minh had a following, it's estimated maybe 25,000. But anyway, the executive committee of the southern branch of Ho Chi Minh's republic on 28 April 1947, and we have the document here, signed by Mr. Pham Ngap Tuong, ordered the execution of Mr. Wen Fushou. And then we have a report of 20 May 1947, a notice to the Executive Committee of the South about the execution of the order, and at the bottom here it says, Mr. Wen Fushou has been executed.
The brutal murders of 1945, Ho Chi Minh claimed that they were the doing of the local cadres. Let me take the case of Pham Nguyen, who was arrested on the 23rd of August 1945. After a delegation came from the center of Hanoi, he was killed. One of Pham Nguyen's sons went to Hanoi and asked Ho why it was that his father was killed. Ho responded that it was an actual error of the local cadres, of which he knew nothing at the time. The second case is that of Ta Tu Tao, who was murdered in Phan Thiet. In 1946, when Ho Chi Minh went to Paris and was asked about this, he appeared truly sad and lamented. We were grief-stricken when news reached us of Ta Tu Tao's death. When pressed, however, he softly responded with a blood-curdling answer. All those not following our line would be crushed. The communists have this philosophy, which is called killing potential enemies. This means that they advocate killing all those with potential who fail to follow them, or who are perceived as possibly harming the communist cause at a later date. This obviously favors the communists, but in the end harms the nation, as it sometimes takes 4 or 5 generations before one can produce a true genius. In the resistance war against the French for independence, all political parties in Vietnam and all elements in society, everyone wanted to take part, but the communists wanted to keep the monopoly of power, so that was why they sought to eliminate all those who thought differently from them. Thousands were murdered, and I myself can cite the names of many of my friends, like Dang Vu Chu, Quang Trong, Dang Van Nguyen, Dang Van But. We should not wonder whether it was Ho Chi Minh or the CPV that should bear the responsibility for all those assassinations, because there was no doubt who was at the head of the Communist Party at the time, and that their policy was to eliminate all of their nationalist rivals. And even though it can be said that Ho led his troops to victory and independence after more than 30 years of war, a legitimate question has been raised as to the cost, estimated at 10 million dead and wounded, of that effort. Many other countries, including neighbors of Vietnam like the Philippines, Burma, or Indonesia, have gained their independence at much less cost in lives and much sooner in time.
What is horrible about Ho Chi Minh's revolution is that almost like Pol Pot's in Cambodia, his wars were accompanied by a genocidal land reform which took the lives of nearly 200,000 persons, or 172,008 souls to be exact, in 3 years of peace from 1953 to 1956.
This land reform, aped from the Chinese, decreed that 5% of any village must at least be found to be landowners. And once they are found, irrespective of whether they are guilty of any crime, they must be brought to public denunciation campaigns, vilified, spat on, beaten up, trampled upon, and eventually killed like dogs. What is even more outrageous is that recently it is revealed that 78%, or 4 out of 5, of the victims were found to be wrongly executed.
Cuộc cải cách ruộng đất đợt 5.
Ho Chi Minh visited Beijing in January 1950, then went to the Soviet Union. In his meeting with Stalin, Ho was urged to do 2 things. Ho was to bring the Communist Party out into the open and to carry out the land reform in accordance with the communist model. Thereafter, Ho sent a delegation to Beijing, ostensibly to learn about Marxism, Leninism, but in actuality, it was to learn how to carry out the land reform in accordance with the Chinese model. These delegations came back to Vietnam and organized pilot testings in various localities. I have an aunt who was also submitted to public denunciation. Her husband was a Viet Minh big shot and a member of the district Lien Viet committee. Nonetheless, he was publicly denounced, kept in a buffalo stable, did not even get enough to eat, and finally died by the time they released him. "You should pick who to be friends with," she said, "for the communists are very inhuman and extremely tricky." I retorted, "But my father is a communist." She merely said, "It was because your father doesn't understand, that's why he is with them." With its call for class enmity, the land reform brought great division to the countryside and stoked up class hatred. Furthermore, it did away with the traditional morality of inciting, forcing children to denounce their parents, wives to denounce their husbands, setting brother against brother and students against their teachers. It also damaged the spiritual and cultural heritage of the nation through the burning of religious buildings like temples and churches and communal houses and other cultural sites. The evidence is there in Ho's letters to Stalin dated October 30th, 1952, when he was in Moscow asking for the latter's approval.
The land reform, which was called sky roiling and earth shaking, was brought to an end in the fall of 1956. The Communist Party admitted that it had erred and proceeded to a so-called rectification campaign. But in reality, Chiang Ching, who headed this unprecedented bloodletting, argued that this was a victory for the peasant farmers. And in a letter dated 18 of August 1956, Ho himself stressed, "The successful completion of the land reform is a great victory."